Luke Hatfield, joined by Liam Keane here at Molyneux. Liam, we've just witnessed Wolverhampton Wanderers 0, Burnley 0. Not a dreadful 0-0, not a great one, but ultimately a frustrating night, I think, for a lot of Wolves fans.
Yeah, that's pretty much the way to sum it up. Wolves have come into this game and, for the large part, looked after possession quite well. Been on the front foot for most of it, bar a couple flat periods, particularly flat beginning of the second half. It's the same story as Norwich, where with the opportunities they did create, they weren't ruthless enough, they weren't clinical enough, the forwards weren't selfish enough to go for them, although the one time Adama Traore was selfish enough to go for it, he probably should have squared it to Jimenez. So it's almost ironic, really, that, you know, I think it sums up really the chance in the second half. Hwang has got an opportunity to take a snatch shot with his left foot, 10 yards. If he gets it on target, probably scores. Tries to cut back on his right foot and loses the ball. I think that pretty much sums up Wolves. That in a nutshell sums up Wolves in this game. Frustrating, not quite clinical and not quite clicking, with some positives in there as well, I think.
Yeah, and you touched on it there. The key moment in the 90 minutes came in the first half. Adama Traore, who caused Burnley all kinds of problems in that first half, I thought was a real live wire. But again, it's the same old story with him, and I know you and me have different views on Traore, Liam. But he breaks away, he's got Jimenez on his left in acres of space, and I mean acres, going into that penalty area. He takes a touch away, has a shot on goal, admittedly unlucky with the strike, hammers the crossbar, bounces down. I think the referee looked at his watch thinking it was going to go off at one point because he thought it might have crossed the line, but it didn't. And the chance was gone. And that was the biggest moment. And reality, he's got Jimenez, who's a proven goal scorer on his left side, who he should probably play to from there.
I'm not upset that a player wants to score and a player wants to go for goal. And if that's, you know, a few inches under the bar or a few inches over the line, hitting the crossbar, we're not having the same conversation.
No.
But the reality is he didn't score it. I think just looking at his finishing and his style, he does leather every opportunity he has. There's no real finesse or placement there, which, you know, arguably he had the time to do it and the space to do it. But with you know, Lowton coming across and with Jimenez there, in that very, very particular example, he has to square it. He has to play it to him, because, as you say, Jimenez, proven goal scorer, will finish that. It's in acres of space. It's got to be a square, and, you know, Wolves are 1-0 up. I'll give him his credit, his due. You know, Traore was probably Wolves' most dangerous attacking player, at least. You know, he was involved in pretty much everything that went right for them going forward. A few excellent solo runs that ultimately didn't, you know, end in a goal. But that's the same story, isn't it? We need it to start ending in goals, and similar with the other players, just taking chances, really.
Yeah, a couple of other flashpoints. I thought Hwang was maybe lucky to stay on the pitch. Initially, when I saw it first time, I thought it was a nailed-on red card. A clash, I can't remember, it might have been with Lowton himself, actually, and he throws an elbow. Admittedly, he catches an elbow in the original kind of clash in the air when they're trying to win a header, but then he throws an elbow. I thought he was lucky to get away with it. On replays, you can kind of understand why it's not the red card, but in the same respect, I thought he was a little bit lucky.
I'm pretty much exactly the same. Seeing it in real time, it was right in front of us as well, wasn't it? I thought it was a red. Watching the replay, I can understand why it hasn't been a red. I personally think it's one of those situations of VAR where if the referee gives a red, they don't overturn it. If he doesn't give a red, they don't overturn it.
Yeah.
For right or wrong, if you agree with that decision in particular, or VAR in particular, but I think that's the situation with it. There's some arguments you could say the output from Lowton, the initial challenge wasn't great either, but potentially a little bit lucky. Coming away with 2 yellows, I think it's for both players is probably just about fair.
Yeah.
But I can understand people feeling aggrieved, particularly on Burnley's side, because it wasn't great. But, you know, credit to Sean Dyche, actually. I will say this. He did say in the post-match press conference, despite his protests on the sidelines, after the game, he did say that, you know, he doesn't want players being sent off for that. So
kind of shoves him off with his elbow than opposed to actually elbow.
Yeah, it wasn't a real, you know, directed strike, really, if you can put it that way. It was more of a shove, but potentially a little bit lucky.
I mean, we discussed this, you know, when the teams were announced, Liam. The bench options they weren't, they weren't free flowing for Wolves, were they? I mean, we had two goalkeepers, one very young goalkeeper, a couple of other young players who we don't expect to get on the pitch, and we saw just the one substitute in Trincao come on. It's something they need to address, isn't it?
Certainly. So you've got Chem Campbell, who has been on the bench this season, but not for a while. Come back in. Hugo Bueno get his first place for the first team on the bench this season. Luke Cundle, who, to be fair, has been on the bench pretty much every week, but still a youngster who hasn't played in the Premier League yet. Louis Molden, who's a young goalkeeper, not played in the Premier League yet, 19. So it's an issue, it certainly is. And again, they named 8 rather than 9.
I mean, they do have other issues. Obviously, Neves was suspended, and you've got Daniel Pedence who's got COVID, but still.
Yeah, still. It will look hopefully a bit healthier on Saturday. Neves will be back from his suspension. It's just a one game. Daniel Pedence hopefully will be back if they get the isolation done in time. They need to check the rules on that. That one's touch and go. Fernando Marçal, who wasn't involved today because of COVID, obviously won't be involved for Saturday either, which comes too soon. So you certainly get Neves back minimum, but you've got those two COVID, one of them touch and go, one of them definitely not. You've got Willy Bolly injured, and then obviously the long-term absentees in Neto, Johnny, Mosquera. So it starts to add up, doesn't it, when you take all those into account. When they start naming only 8 substitutes, which has been the 2 weeks in a row now, or 2 games in a row rather, and then tonight 4 academy players on the bench as well out of those 8. It's certainly concerning. Speaking to Bruno afterwards, he almost chuckled when I asked the question, because not because he finds it funny, but because he almost, if you don't laugh, you cry almost in the situation, because he understands how difficult it is. And he said, Liam, if I wasn't concerned 2 weeks ago when we already had a small squad, I'm paraphrasing slightly, then I'm certainly concerned now, basically, is what he was saying, because they're going to have to try and get through December and January with a lot of games, limited players, and then potentially Size and Bolly going to AFCON as well. It's certainly concerning. They need, get a couple academy players some games, maybe recall a couple and make some signings hopefully as well. It's going to be a challenging period.
It is, and what's going to be challenging as well is things don't get much easier for Wolves now. A real tough game coming up.
Liverpool scored 4 again tonight, didn't they?
They know where the back of the net is.
Yeah, they're flying at the moment, to be fair to them. Jota scored again, I believe, as well tonight. So you see him coming back to Molineux, and you fear the worst, because he's in real good form. Obviously, Mo Salah is one of the best players in the world. So I really, every game of football is competitive, and Wolves have to be competitive. But I do think you can class this as a free hit, really. Even at home against them, they're that good. I don't want to see Wolves sitting off them. If you sit off them, they'll break you down, and they'll score goals, and Wolves won't get a sniff, won't get a chance. If you go for them, try and press them high, try and win the ball back, yeah, they might still break you down, they might still cut through you and get a goal or 2, but you might get some chances, you might be able to take them, you might scrape a result. I think, particularly in front of these home fans, they won't want to see Wolves sit back and roll over. I think you have to go for them, take the free hit. If you lose 3-4-0, yeah, you're going to get criticised, the fans aren't going to be happy, but you've gone for it. If you lose that scoreline and sit back and let them do what they want, it's going to be equally as bad or even worse. I think you go for it, you try and take your chances and hope to come away with something. And it doesn't get much easier after that. It's Man City away. The game's come thick and fast, certainly.
Yeah, right, there we go. 0-0 here at Molineux. You know where to go for all the post-match reaction. ExpressTheStar.com.